Hello and welcome to our wonderful audience of 39th Kino Film Festival, the festival of the young viewers. And our guest today is Igor Drljača, director of the movie The White Fortress. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, even virtually.
And my first question will be about much global topic than your movie. Because I think it's very important, because your characters are living in the very specific place, modern day Sarajevo. And could you tell us a bit about their world, today's Bosnia, the social landscape of that place?
So Bosnia is a very tricky country still. I mean, if you pay attention to any news coming from the ex-Yugoslav region, you'll always see headlines about certain politicians or a certain politician trying to sort of destabilize or undo the peace treaty, and kind of, there's always like talk about separatism, and so you're constantly on the edge. Like the young people are constantly on the edge. The population there is constantly on the edge. They've stopped taking some of them seriously because they feel like it's just a ploy to kind of get attention. It's election fear mongering. But there is sometimes there are concrete steps that are being taken that are that are sort of in a way a little bit more than just talk. And what happens as a result is young people essentially are trapped. They're in a system that does not care for them. Like that's the simplest way of saying it. When you have a country that's built on ethno-political sort of identity, it invariably has to corrupt you. It has to corrupt your own ability to actually make a life for yourself, your ability to have a career. So what ends up happening is that a lot of the young people just leave. You have a lot more people leaving than are being born. So you have a negative population growth. So anywhere between 70 to 100,000 people leave Bosnia and Herzegovina every year. Predominantly young people who are sometimes get their education in Bosnia, but they leave even for lower paid jobs or lower paid opportunities, just because there aren't many jobs in Bosnia. You have a youth unemployment rate that still stands at 40%. I think the other article talking about, it's like we've had the best quarter. We have 37.8% unemployment rate. 37.8 is good news. So it in many ways, the simplest way of saying it is that he does not care for you. It is a country that does not care for you.
Mm-hmm. And the characters in your film are, I think it's very unique about your movie, that they're, especially for us, for viewers from other countries of Europe and abroad, that they're first generation born and raised after the war in Bosnia. And how does the situation that they're not lived at that time, which is, I think, important for Bosnians people, impacts them, because your character Faruk is watching constantly the movie about the war. It's about Second World War, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us about this war trauma of which they get from their parents and grandparents?
I think, I mean, much like the experience in Poland, I would argue, with that generation, that sort of the World War II generation, there's a level of trauma that you can kind of feel imprinted on the population, even if they didn't necessarily see the trauma themselves. It almost gets passed on. It gets passed on. Some people argue even on a genetic level, like epigenetics kind of imprints trauma, but I won't get into that because I don't know much about that. But I think trauma also lingers in just the storytelling, in the way that you identify, in the way that people get on or don't get on with their sort of everyday activities, sort of banality of the trauma being kind of rendered in these everyday situations. And that is the thing that like I see from people when I'm there. And I was a generation that actually went through the war, so I know what kind of like triggers a lot of the people in my generation have. And then the generation that was born after the war, like the generation you're asking about, even though they didn't go through it, there's like a compounded trauma of like maybe their older cousins went through it, maybe their siblings went through it. If it's like some kids that were born in the 90s and were there as children, they might have certain memories of the war, let's say. And then there's the actual parents and the grandparents that also went through it. So you have this sort of invisible trauma that kind of lingers and is ever present, and it manifests sometimes in the strangest ways, right? So you're living in a place where you have to understand that almost everybody has PTSD on some level, especially the older generations. And first you have like the generations that have the PTSD from World War II still, who are still alive. And then you have the generations who have the trauma from the recent war, or like a lot of times it's the people that survived two wars, the war in the 40s and the war in the 90s. So just like something that I felt through my grandparents, like my grandmother, for example, she lived through both World War II and this war, and she's still alive. So and there's just these kind of ticks that they don't go away. They're just sort of ever present in how like people sort of manage. And in that space where you're not allowed to heal entirely, like you are living in a space where your trauma is constantly being politicized. And in that space, where you have, you still have a country where entire segments celebrate, war criminals, right? People like who might have done harm to your family. And there's like now there are some laws about genocide denial that are being implemented and actually they're being not just sort of passed but enacted, and that sort of like created a lot of tension in the state between the two entities, for example. So Republika Srpska, and which is the predominantly Serbian entity, and Federacija, which is the bigger Croat Bosniak entity, for people that are not sort of familiar with how that country's set up. And as a result, you have a system that, for your lack of a better way of saying it, it actually profits from, using people's trauma for their own kind of political ends, for their own needs, and feeds off of it. They create narratives around it, and that's quite troubling. And that's another reason when you talk to young people there, it's like, I don't want my children to have to go through this debilitating kind of system, and this kind of strange system of values where, you're worth what political party affiliation you may have in that space, right?
And I think that one of the most wonderful parts of your movie, it's cast. Could you tell us more about casting and young actors which you worked during the production of the movie?
So the casting was an open call. We were looking for essentially all the young people that were cast in the film. For Farouk, I did have in mind Pavle Chimidikic, and we did offer the role to him in advance. We just weren't sure if he would be available. he was quite busy actor, and what ended up happening is that I sent him like a short film I did before. I sent him the script. He liked it. He wanted to be a part of the project. So that kind of was solved, and we were kind of relieved. And then for Mona and Almir and little Bilal Vrecho, that was a bit more sort of it was a lot more it took a lot more time, and we had, like I said, we had open calls that involved about in the end about 300 people plus we saw, and they came from all parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, mostly from the Canton Sarajevo, but like some people came from other cities, and we did it for about 2 weekends, and then a handful of days. Some people sent them self tapes, and then it's kind of like we created like these little workshops for the finalists and situations for them to kind of be a part of and enact. And that process lasted for about, I would say, 3 months at least, like from May with the self tapes, and then until early August. And it was kind of amazing to see so many interesting possibilities, because with the finalists, what I did is we had Pavle come to Sarajevo, and then we did like a final chemistry read between the two finalists for Mona, and that sort of ultimately determined it, like the energy and the chemistry that they had, as these people embodying these characters. And yeah, Sumaya was somebody who had no previous acting experience. She said she did one play as in the middle school, I believe. That was sort of the extent of it, and hadn't even heard of the audition until her aunt, who lives in Germany, heard it on a radio. There was a radio ad to like that they're looking for 13 to 17-year-old teenage girls to be part of the film.
One last question, because unfortunately we're running out of time, and I ask you for a short answer, because in the film we can feel that it's a mixture of few genres, like melodrama, social drama, maybe even the thriller. Could you tell me which one of these genres is most important to you?
I think it functions as a thriller effectively, but with sort of like some kind of semi-fantastical, almost fairy tale-like qualities, but only from one perspective, right? From the other perspective, it's a social drama. So like, I was trying to sort of have this, the gaze, depending on whose gaze it is or whose gaze we feel in any given space, whether it's Mona's or Farouk's, you have a slightly different sort of tonality to the proceedings, because the same situation is being perceived slightly differently, right? For one person, it's an opportunity. For the other person, it's a huge risk. So I was trying to use the sort of the genre conventions and apply them almost like to the scenes inhibited by a particular character, which is super dangerous, and I'd kind of caution about how you kind of approach that, but that's in effect what I was trying to do, and it took a lot of kind of, because this project took about 7 years to complete, and for me to kind of keep being engaged with the project, and I made like 3 other feature films between the moment that we had the idea and then from the moment that we got financing. So the script sort of evolved. It evolved into something that I felt was more accurate, but also more formally challenging than, and also formally more engrossing than what like a pure social drama, and which I kind of became a bit apprehensive about, kind of, and having the film just kind of be part of that milieu. And so yeah, I navigated this almost as a thriller with these other elements.
Thank you very much. Thank you for meeting, Igor. It was very nice, and it was a pleasure for me to speak with you. And
Thank you as well.
And one day, feel invited to the next editions of the Kino Film Festival. We'll always waiting for you.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a great festival, and all the best to you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.